Have you ever wondered what happens when Prime Minister Modi travels to a foreign country? Very often, the Indian diaspora, especially NRIs, give him an extremely warm welcome. Sometimes it is so intense that it almost starts looking theatrical. There are many people crying, people touching his feet, people dressing up as Bharat Mata, and crowds treating the visit almost like a national festival. But here is the puzzle. Many of the same people who show strong support for Modi also support liberal policies in their countries. For example, in the US, many Indian Americans support the Democratic Party. They support positions such as religious equality, more humane treatment of undocumented immigrants, less media censorship, and affirmative action. So the question is, how can the same group support liberal values in the US and at the same time support a conservative majoritarian leader in India like Prime Minister Modi? The research I'm discussing today asks exactly this question. The researchers wanted to understand why Indian Americans specifically could support PM Modi and BJP in India while also supporting the Democratic Party and the liberal policy positions in the US. This is interesting because Modi's government is generally associated with conservative positions on religion, immigration, media, and affirmative action, while the Democratic Party in the US is associated with more liberal positions on many of the same issues. Before the 2020 US election, the researchers surveyed Indian Americans. Now, their sample included not only American citizens, but also Indian citizens living in the US. What they found was striking. A majority of Indian Americans, almost to the tune of 56%, identified with the Democratic Party, while only around 15% identified as Republicans. But despite this liberal leaning in the American context, nearly half of the respondents approved of Modi's performance. The researchers called this group Modi Democrats, which made up about 24% of the sample. These were people who supported the Democratic Party in the US while simultaneously supporting Modi in India. What was especially interesting was that this group was almost entirely composed of Hindu Indian Americans. The researchers then split the sample by religious identity to understand this difference more clearly. What they found was that Indian Americans who are marginalized minorities both in India and the US, for example, Muslim Indian Americans, tend to maintain a more consistent liberal position across both countries. They support minority rights, religious equality, and more permissive immigration policy, regardless of whether the discussion is about India or the US. In other words, their liberal position remains more stable across both contexts of India and the US. But Hindu Indian Americans occupy a different position. In the US, they are a minority. In India, they are part of the religious majority, and this changes how they respond to the same issues. In the US, they tend to support more liberal policies because those policies protect them as a minority. But when similar issues are applied to India, they're more likely to adopt conservative or majoritarian positions on religion, immigration, policing, media, and affirmative action. So what is this if it is not hypocrisy? When Hindu Indian Americans are a minority outside India, liberal values become useful because those values protect them. But when they imagine India, where Hindus are the majority, many become more comfortable with majoritarian politics. To me, this is the most uncomfortable part of the research. It suggests that political values are not always held as universal principles. Sometimes people support the values that benefit their own position in a particular context. One could call this hypocrisy. One could also call it strategic self-interest or opportunism. But either way, it shows that many of us are capable of telling one moral story when we are vulnerable and a different moral story when we are powerful. We want equality when we are a minority, but when we are part of the majority, we may become much less interested in equality for others. And this is not only about Indian Americans. This is also about how politics works today. Politicians understand this very well. They know that many people respond more strongly to identity, symbols, and emotions than to actually policy substance. So politics increasingly becomes a performance of symbols rather than a discussion of actual outcomes. Look at how international politics is often discussed today. When global leaders meet at G7, much of the public conversation is no longer about what deal was signed, what diplomatic gain was achieved. Instead, the discussion was who shook hands with whom, who ignored whom, who got the photo, who looked powerful, who looked weak, who was snubbed, and who was dominated. Earlier, the question used to be, what did our political representatives achieve for the country? Did they negotiate well? Did they get a better deal? Did they protect our national interests? Now, very often, the discussion shifts to appearance. How did the handshake look? Who smiled? Who stood where? Who was seen talking to whom? Politics becomes image management. And this is not only happening in India. We see similar tactics in the US as well. When Trump cannot easily sell the substance of a deal, for example, on Iran, attention shifts away from the deal itself and towards, for instance, Italian PM Meloni begging for a photo. The public is moved away from policy and towards drama. In that sense, India has been ahead of the curve. Yes, we are the Vishwaguru in bullshitting. For more than a decade now, PM Modi's politics has mastered the art of turning political communication into symbolic performance. And if this is the model that others are now learning from, then yes, in a strange way, we've become a kind of world leader in this style of politics. So the larger point is this. We should not pretend that politicians alone created this discourse. We are also asking for it. We reward the politics of optics. We respond to symbols more than substance. We want moral language when it protects us, but we often become silent when the same moral principle should protect someone else. And this is why the research matters. It's not just about Modi supporters in America. It's also about how identity, power, and self-interest shape political values. It asks us a difficult question. Do we really believe in liberal values, or do we believe in them only when we need them? Thank you so much for joining me on Devil Wears Data, and I'll see you next time again with another important piece of research.